2020 budget request.
Call the hearing to order. I'd like to invite or thank our Ag Secretary for being here this morning. Secretary Perdue, appreciate very much you being here before the committee. Also, Dr. Robert Johansson, thank you as well. We appreciate you being here to testify. And Ms. Erica Navarro, thank you very much for you joining us as well. Today, the purpose of today's hearing is to discuss the Department of Ag's fiscal 2020 budget request. And I hope that today's discussion will clarify the administration's support for rural America and production agriculture. The proposed reductions would directly impact small rural communities many of us call home. Production agriculture is the cornerstone of our local rural economies, and weakening the farm safety net leaves farmers and ranchers vulnerable to low commodity prices and unforeseen weather conditions. And of course, right now, they're facing both. Farmers and ranchers in our state and across the Ag Belt rely on the Department's tools and resources to stay in business during these tumultuous times in farm country. Cuts to Ag research hurt our country's ability to compete internationally and meet the demands of growing global population. Ag remains one of America's net export industries due to open trade, and we must continue to explore foreign market access for our producers and, of course, expand trade. While I support many proposals included in the President's budget, such as increased funding for our military and defense, the burden of balancing the budget cannot be placed on the backs of farmers, rural communities, and food aid recipients. In our fiscal year 2019 Ag Appropriations bill, this subcommittee made great strides towards modernizing infrastructure in rural America, increasing funding for ag research programs, and enhancing pest and disease prevention and response efforts. I look forward to hearing an update on the Department's plans for implementation of these priorities. I believe we should be investing in the future of agriculture in rural America. As Chairman, I look forward to working with Senator Merkley and the other members of the subcommittee to identify those priorities and make the most effective and efficient decisions on behalf of American taxpayers. I look forward to discussing these issues today with you, Mr. Secretary, and your team. I also want to thank you for your commitment and your advocacy on behalf of our farmers and ranchers. Having grown up in agriculture, I know that you not only know about farming and ranching, you've lived it your whole life. And so I've appreciated your commitment and your responsiveness. No question our producers face challenges right now. You know, whether it's in trade, whether it's the flooding like we've talked about, low commodity price, a whole range of issues. And of course, the whole purpose of our farm program is to be counter-cyclical, to save money in good times, which we want to do, recognizing the budget deficit, but make sure that we're there for them when they need us. And so I look forward to working not only with this committee, but with you. And I appreciate very much our working relationship, but working with you and your team to craft the best budget we can for our farmers and ranchers, and be as responsive as we can. In that regard, again, I appreciate your willingness to be responsive, just as you are here today, working with us on this budget. With that, I will turn to Vice Chairman Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Perdue, welcome. Good to have you here. Dr. Johansson, Mrs. Navarro, we appreciate you coming to discuss the President's budget proposal for the Department of Agriculture. And Mr. Secretary, I've very much enjoyed working with you. I didn't particularly enjoy reading the budget, though. And it has a lot in it that's significant to the agricultural economy, to Oregon's agricultural economy, to rural America in general, and I'll be interested in hearing your thoughts and comments. We are currently debating in Congress much-needed disaster assistance, which is relevant to much of our agricultural community across the country. I'm pleased that right now the bill includes help to Oregon's wine grape growers who very much had their grapes affected by the forest fires because of the smoke contamination. I hope we'll be able to get this disaster bill passed quickly and get these funds out. The budget looks very similar to the budget from last year. With the recent passage of fiscal year 2019 omnibus, Congress changed much of what was proposed. Yet the administration once again proposing to eliminate or reduce the funding for many of the agencies at USDA. Net spending for USDA is cut by more than $4 billion. That's a 22% cut, while the rural ag economy continues to struggle. So I'm afraid this budget, if enacted the way it was, would do more harm than good. The budget decimates rural development. I go around my state, 36 counties every year. I hold an open town hall. By the end of this year, I'll hit about 400 town halls since I was elected. And the circumstances of economic development in rural Oregon are like much of the country. They're facing a lot of challenges as our country changes. And so to see vital housing loan and grant programs, rural business service eliminated, that concerns me a lot. Research funding cut by 16%. The Farm Service Agency by 18%. Important nutrition programs eliminated. And elimination of the Food for Peace and McGovern Dole. And almost no agency is spared. USDA does important work that impacts every single life in America. And this budget doesn't reflect that important mission. I also have concerns about the proposal to move two vital research agencies, the Economic Research Service and the National Institute for Food and Ag, NIFA, outside the capital region. I'm also particularly concerned about the SNAP rule. I joined a bipartisan group of 47 senators who asked you to withdraw this, and maybe we can have more conversation about that. I believe a budget is a reflection of the administration's priorities, and I'm concerned that our farmers and ranchers in rural communities are not the priority I would like them to be. So I'm hopeful we can discuss these issues and work on this committee as we did a year ago to make sure the vital programs much needed across America receive the funding that they need to operate effectively. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. Are there other opening statements? Okay, then we will proceed. Mr. Secretary, again, thank you for being here, and we welcome your opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Senator Merkley, and distinguished members of the committee. It's again a appreciated privilege to visit with you and talk about appropriations. I guess I would begin because some of the comparisons of the enacted budget, which was just recently passed, occurred after the administration puts its budget together. So I think it would help all of us, and I know you all would like to as well, get back to a regular order of top-line numbers and other type of budget authorizations, and then the authorizing committee and others. So to some degree, we've handcuffed ourselves in some of these comparisons, but I certainly appreciate many of the comments that you've made, and certainly concur with many of them, and I think together we will get a budget out that will benefit rural America and our ag economy, and that's our goal as we go. So we appreciate the efforts here, and I hope you recognize that we're doing our best to be responsive to you in many ways as the people's elected representatives here. Obviously, our founders created a natural tension between the appropriators and the lawmakers as well as the executive branch, and we really welcome that in the candid discussion of how we implement the laws that you passed, including the Farm Bill, as well as the appropriations that you deem that are most needed and most effective. We are striving, as was said before, in USDA to become the most effective and the most efficient and the most customer-focused agency in the federal government in dealing with your constituents. And I hope that you have noticed that difference, and if we fall short, then we hope that you will identify those for us. You mentioned the disaster bill. Obviously, that's a concern, and hopefully we can reconcile our differences very quickly about that. You have some producers really all over the country now who are from the fire-ravaged areas of the West that Senator Merkley discussed, to the hurricanes of Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, to the floods of the Midwest, that all are in desperate need. A farm safety net you all have created through the Farm Bill and through appropriations in the past is a safety net, but it does not contemplate utter destruction and disaster such as we've seen in these types of situations. So I appreciate very much your recognition of that. Obviously, trade is utmost on all of our minds, certainly from a farmer-producer perspective. From one perspective, we're blessed in this nation to have absolute food security, contributing to national security, but that makes us dependent on exports, and agriculture being one of our export surplus sectors in our economy. The trade disruptions of 2018 have been very problematic for producers, and while the President authorized and we implemented a market facilitation program that helped producers in some places, every producer out there would rather have a good trading, fair trading environment than any kind of aid in that regard. We don't anticipate any of that earlier or this year, any more help. Hopefully, with the talks continuing between China and the U.S., and we can hopefully consummate a very good trade deal in the near future. Obviously, Ambassador Lighthizer is also engaged in Japan. So for the trade issues continues to be paramount as we continue to break down those barriers, seek export opportunities. Obviously, our Undersecretary for Foreign Ag Service, Ted McKinney's really circling the globe looking for new markets. We've become actually too dependent on one large customer. So we're looking throughout Indochina, India, and other places there that we may sell our products as well. Certainly, infrastructure is important in ag. You all understand that. The broadband, particularly, being almost the utility of the 21st century, and we appreciate the funding that you've given there. We want to do a proof of concept that will make you proud over this $600 million that you all appropriated last year, as well as the $550 this year. These applications will begin being received here just in a couple of weeks, and there's been a lot of interest from all across the country there over broadband connectivity. It has influence in certainly in precision agriculture as well as many other areas. Regarding the budget, I look forward to your questions, and we'll address those as they come up, probably more profitably than generally. We're working very hard on Farm Bill implementation as well, and I look forward to discussing. Obviously, the administration has a constitutional responsibility to present a budget that's fiscally responsible and no longer puts off tough decisions. And while at USDA we want to be able to support our ag and rural communities, we're willing to do our part in whatever it takes. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning. I look forward to your questions, and I hope that you will find that we are doing our best to live up to our motto in USDA of do right and feed everyone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Do either of your associates have any opening comments before we proceed to questions? Okay, then we'll go to 5-minute rounds of questioning. Let's start on trade. Can give us the latest in terms of your estimate of where we are with not only getting USMCA to the floor to try to get that ratified. I believe that's a good agreement that we need to get ratified as soon as we can as far as our ability to export and trade with Canada and Mexico, but then also with China, and you mentioned Japan, EU, any others. Both, where are we in terms of getting something? I know you maybe can't say precisely, but give us as much information as you can. This is, of course, incredible interest and concern to our farmers because of their need to export, but also additional sales, too. One of the things, you did the market stabilization payment. That was helpful, but we're now in year 2. We need some of these sales. And so while we're negotiating, what about additional sales? So if you could give us whatever information you can in that regard.
Absolutely. Let's begin with USMCA. While no trade agreement is perfect, I believe if you go chapter by chapter, verse by verse of this agreement, I do believe from labor, environment, and certainly ag, it's an improvement over our NAFTA 1.0. And I think if people are objective in looking at that, then they would recognize that and hopefully do that. The ITC report, I think, is due out imminently, and that will allow you all to begin to consider it seriously. I would hope that we could do that sooner rather than later. I think that's a statement to the world that we are serious about our trade negotiations. So hopefully we can do that. Obviously, there's one sector, probably in seasonal fruit and produce, where we were not able to get what we wanted. It was on the table. Ambassador Lighthizer fought hard for that, but ultimately that, in the spirit of negotiation, had to be eliminated. Certainly, the China negotiations are very hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic with China. It's never over till it's over, but I think the news this morning was that Secretary Mnuchin feels that they have a enforcement protocol, which has always been the problem in the past, to enforce any agreements on both sides that are made. But the numbers for agriculture are very hopeful and optimistic. If we can consummate a deal with China, it will be extremely good for U.S. agriculture, I think, as well as the U.S. economy, dealing with those issues over cyber theft and illegal transfer of intellectual property. So that's a good deal. Ambassador Lighthizer also is engaged in Japan, understanding that the TPP implementation will continue to disadvantage our farmers very quickly, and he understands that, has a good understanding of that, and is working hard to get a ag agreement that is certainly equal or better than TPP was initially. So those are the issues. While I indicate those are the three that are most public, but again, Undersecretary Light, Ted McKinney is going around the world, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, India, those kinds of places, as well as China, in order to find other customers. The market access portion of the money, the facilitation program that you gave last year, working with collaborators in all industry sectors, I think 57 different industry sectors, will help us gain market access and build markets for the future as we did in China.
Any sense on timing? I know you're in a negotiation, so on the one hand, you have to be careful in terms of what you say about timing. But on the other hand, I know I don't have to tell you the concern our farmers have right now with prices and moving product. And so, the timing matters. Do you have any sense of timing on the agreements?
Well, that is a challenge, obviously, over timing. You want to make sure you get it right, but I'm frankly impressed with how quickly the China discussions are moving. The Vice Premier has been to the U.S. At least on 3 different occasions here since Christmas, and I've sat in the meetings in the Oval Office, and they seem to be very sincere. I am of the belief that both President Trump and President Xi of China really want a resolution to these trade discussions, and I'm hopeful that we can see that sooner rather than later. These are complex agreements, as you know, but much work has been done and much agreement. One of the things we're excited about at U.S. agriculture is that many of the non-tariff issues having to do with protocols and inspections seem to be covered, and some of the non-tariff barriers have been just as difficult as the tariff barriers, and that will enable them to accomplish the kind of purchases that they put on the table.
Well, I would ask that if it does continue, if we get a deal sooner, fantastic. If it continues to go longer, I would ask that you continue to advocate for purchases as a sign of good faith while that negotiation is going on, because our farmers are on the front lines out there, as you know. With that, I'll turn to Ranking Member Merkley.
Thank you so much. I want to start out with the hemp production program. This was a project that Senator McConnell, Senator Rand, Senator Wyden, and myself worked very hard to have hemp become a significant agricultural crop in America. It is now a situation where there are 615 registered hemp growers in Oregon. and I know there's a lot in Kentucky as well, and others across the nation. Both the fiber and the CBD oil has made this of great interest to people, and yet we don't have rules. And it looks like it's not going to have rules until we have the 2020 crop year. This is a pretty exciting new opportunity for farmers across America. Any way we can speed that up?
I'd love to, Senator, but probably unlikely. As you know, the dairy sector, we are prioritizing our dairy farmers in implementing the Farm Bill. This is obviously a new issue. It requires a lot of complexities because of its uniqueness and in its product and similarity to some things that many states and the federal government considers illegal. So we have to do this in a pretty more strictly regulated environment than maybe a commodity crop that's not like that.
So I've had the chance to go out to a hemp farm in Oregon. I don't think it's as complex as you're thinking. We both have the marijuana side, very different plant from the hemp. I'd like to invite you to join me out in Oregon for a little tour of our hemp industry. And we have these exciting little local places where we have very rural areas where they're setting up oil press operations, variety of different technologies involved, but they're like all excited because there's suddenly a little production facility in very rural parts of the state that rarely get anything new in. And so I'd like to share some of that enthusiasm with you, and maybe you could point at 3 or 4 people to really just drive this through and get it done.
I'd welcome that. Actually, we need to know more about the industry as a whole. I probably know less about that than I do most of the crops, and certainly I would welcome that. There's no lack of enthusiasm for sure for the CBD oil and others, and I'm interested in really what the fiber utilization is, because what are all those industrial uses? Because as productive as American producer is, I'm fearful that we can crash this market before it gets off the ground.
Yeah, it's very possible. The fiber has been so established in Canada for a very long time. It's going to take longer to be able to move the fiber operations and be competitive there, but the oil, it's competitive right away. And so I want to turn to housing, rural housing. Your budget eliminates the single farm direct mortgage program, the repair loan program, all the grant programs. And I have all these rural communities that say, you know, the challenge is when we have an employer who wants to come, there's not housing. And yet when we have people who want to build housing, they're afraid to build it until the employer wants to come. Right. And so these programs are pretty important, and I'd like to encourage you to back restoring them.
Well, I can't disagree with you at all. I think many rural areas have a chicken and egg situation there that you've described, and I think the administration's thought on this was that this process would be consolidated in HUD rather than rural housing, but we understand the impact and the effect that rural housing has contributed to rural America.
I want to turn to broadband. Thank you, by the way. Thank you for your support of rural housing. Turning to broadband, we pushed very hard to greatly amplify the funding 11-fold from $60 million to $660 million, another $500,000 the next year. So we're, or $500 million. So now we have a lot of funds, but the program to actually get the broadband grants out to communities has been slower than we hoped. And the rules are pretty complicated. I'm encouraging everybody to apply, even if they think they don't fit the rules, because what I'm hearing is very few communities will fit exactly with what's been laid out. But this is such a big need. So many rural economies they're like, we can't keep people here, or we can't draw people here if we don't have good broadband. So I just want to encourage the fastest possible, most generous rollout. If people's scores are low because they don't meet the programs exactly, but they bother to apply, I'm telling people apply anyway. There's going to be funds left, and maybe you'll honor those grants that don't fit every single aspect.
Well, I very much appreciate you all appropriating another $550 million on top of the $600. We're really on the cusp of receiving the applications now, but the portal has been open since December. We work with technical experts. These are complex applications there. And the way you all design the rules in unserved areas, it didn't happen as quickly as I'd like for it to happen either, but I think we wanted to get it right. We wanted to prove the concept that USDA can really facilitate these types of broadband transformations. We've got $200 in outright grants. That'll be the first thing that goes in April 23rd. We've got $200 coming in May over the loan grant combinations, and then $200 coming in June. in the loan application. So there's been tremendous interest. I share your enthusiasm. I think this is probably the moonshot transformation that we could do if we could connect rural America in the 21st century data usage.
Thank you.
Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Secretary Perdue, welcome. I want to start my time to applaud your efforts to relocate NIFA and ERS outside of Washington, D.C. I believe that government offices that are located closer to people, the people they serve, is a positive thing. And I reject the argument of some that something outside the national capital diminishes its value to farmers and to the country. Kansas City, the city that splits the border between Senator Blunt and I, has 5,000 USDA employees today. And to say that their value to the country is something less than an employee within the department in Washington, D.C., is offensive to me. And so there are good people doing good work across the country. And I'm happy to see you pursue this. I would ask you if you would provide an update on this topic, where we are. Funds in this budget affect this decision. And are there things that you and we can do to make sure that those employees have, those locations have all the staff and training and necessary components to fulfill their jobs?
Well, thank you very much for your support, Senator. I really have been a little surprised with the naysayers on this. I would love to understand more about their issues. About 90% of USDA employees are outside the national capital region. You mentioned Kansas City. We got a great firm there, Minnesota, New Orleans, and many other places across the country doing a great job, Ames, Iowa. And we've had 139 expressions of interest. That's been winnowed down to a middle list. We hope to have sort of the finalists within probably a 3-week time period where we'll begin actual negotiations, which will allow us to provide a cost-benefit analysis, a real benefit analysis for you all as the appropriators to determine. My goal is to treat this as an economic development project, much like it was always used against me when I was governor. 600 or 700 federal jobs is a pretty good plum for economic development. So we expect to get some good proposals here, and we'll go back to those few finalists here and ask for their last and best offer in that regard. If I can't bring a deal to you that I think makes sense, then I wouldn't expect you all to approve it. But I think we'll find some real interest out there that begins to help in the reasons that we began to think about this as far as quality of life and people recruiting some of these young PhD with families outside where they can live a better quality of life.
Mr. Secretary, please consider me an ally in that effort. Also, please consider me an ally. I've offered to the White House and to the USTR, to the Trade Ambassador, to provide whatever leadership I can in support of USMCA's approval by Congress, and I would make the same offer to you. Please put me to work. It is a trade agreement that is of significance. I would make the pitch one more time that we should not withdraw from NAFTA until USMCA is approved. And I would ask, assuming that you agree with me, that you would convey that to the administration.
We have and will continue to advocate very strongly for that position.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I recently toured flood damage in Kansas with our FSA State Director. The floods that occurred, at least initially in Nebraska, have worked their way down to the northeast corner of Kansas. I'm watching the weather this weekend, in which South Dakota is to get 18 to 24 inches of snow. We know that the last flood we had in Kansas of this magnitude occurred in July. This one's occurring in March. There's a lot of rain, spring rains, and a lot of snow melt yet to come. I would ask you just one specific question at the moment about this topic. Could you provide me either today or in the near future the most up-to-date estimate of the ECP budget shortfall, and would you and the department support funds being appropriated to cover the backlog?
The answer to the second question is absolutely, we'll support that. The first question is we don't know yet. The assessments take a while with the floodwaters receding, and as you indicated, potentially even more coming with snow and snow melt coming down. It could be greater, so We don't have good assessments of that currently. We're working with our state partners, both in the state and our federal FSA and NRCS officers across there. If there's a shortfall in that, the good thing about it on the livestock indemnity program, you all lifted the cap on that. So that's helpful to many people that will lose a good amount of livestock in those areas, and we're prepared to support that. But if there's shortfalls, we will certainly advise you of what we assess the damage to be and ask for what's needed.
This may be, Mr. Secretary, we think will be the most important program for farmers and ranchers damaged in Kansas will be ECP, and there's already backlog in that effort. And we've always funded ECP and filled the shortfall. We're trying to do so in the emergency appropriation bill, and we could use your help in accomplishing that.
Well, I hope we can also get the disaster bill out, which would backfill that ECP need in the watershed issues and correcting those stream banks and, you know, the flooding. And I'd never seen the ice associated with the flooding the way it apparently happened here with huge ice blocks that can just carve and really destroy stream beds.
I agree. Never seen anything like it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I could go into a climate change discussion right now, but we'll hold off on that. We'll stick with ag. Look, we're on the cusp of planting season in Montana. Thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary. We're on the cusp of planting season. I'm in that business, as you know. You're in that business, you know. The fact is that show me a crop we can plant right now that's worth anything. It's really hard. And I'm going to tell you, as though I appreciate the trade mitigation payments for our agriculture, the more we do those kind of things, the more taxpayers' ears go up and go, well, you know what, if farmers are getting it, why aren't equipment dealers getting it? If equipment dealers are getting it, how come the gas distributor isn't getting it? So we've got a problem, and I think we've got a problem not only in Montana but across this country. I can give you quotes from folks who were in agriculture. Lyle Benjamin, who's president of the Montana Grain Growers Association, which is one of the largest grain association in the state, said it's going to be hard to break even this year. When you can't break even, you go broke. Rural America is under attack. You know that. We're losing people right and left. We lost them in the 80s. I think we're on the cusp of losing a whole bunch again. Bankers tell me you got about 18 months. Well, we're just about at 18 months. TPP is going into effect without us. I just heard Montana farmers are planting 310,000 fewer acres of wheat, which is great, but what are we going to plant? If you want to plant pulse crops, they're not worth anything. I'll get into hemp in a minute, but the fact is there is so much uncertainty going on right now, and with the tariffs both directions, John Deere announced an increase in their equipment costs, fuel prices are trending up. This is a recipe for disaster in rural America, and it is man-made. We stepped out of TPP. One of Montana's biggest customers was Japan. We no longer have the trade advantages of places like Australia do now with Japan. We don't have any trade advantages. In fact, they have the trade advantages. You know the story. You've heard it. If you haven't, I know you have. Okay. The question is, and I know the chairman talked about this a little bit with China, is there bilateral trade talks going on right now with Japan?
There are. And
when do you anticipate an agreement with Japan?
You know, Senator, that I'm not the negotiator in that regard. We have a U.S. trade representative, and I think the question we better deliver to him. I do know of his interest. I do know his understanding of the disadvantage American producers would have regarding TPP, but yep. I'm hoping it will be sooner rather than later.
Well, I'm here to tell you that I know that some folks in production agriculture want to see the guys go broke because the smaller ones will go first and they think they can buy them out. But I'm telling you, from a rural America perspective, a rural Montana perspective, this is not a good thing. From a food security perspective, this is not a good thing. You got less producers, you got more evacuation from rural America, you got schools closing down, you got hospitals closing down, you got a mess. And it's a mess that's caused by us. Not like in Kansas with the floods, it's caused by us. And so I hope the guy who's negotiating is listening, because time is of the essence here. And if you can help push them, and I know you're a good man, I hope you do. We've got to have trade. I mean, we eat a lot of food domestically, but if we don't have foreign markets, we are hosed. And so it is really important. Now I want to talk about hemp. One of those crops that we might have been able to raise in Montana, and by the way, we still could raise this season, is hemp. I can go into the agronomic effects of hemp, but you know that monoculture is something that doesn't work too well. So if you can put another crop in the rotation, break up weed and disease cycles, it's a good thing. Hemp is one of those crops. Sure. Just like pulse crops were a few years ago in Montana, where we raised nothing but winter wheat and barley. Now we can raise pulse crops. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for the communities. It's a good thing for business. I get that this might be a complicated thing, but doesn't the law allow you to accept state plans?
Senator, the 2014 Farm Bill allowed for that. They will still be able to continue under the 2014.
DEA won't let them because the 2018 Farm Bill supersedes that.
Who won't let them?
DEA. So right now, when they could have used the pilot program from a few years back,
I've not heard that.
You correct me if I'm wrong. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right. They could plan it, but when the new Farm Bill got signed, it superseded the previous one, and now they can't cess or seed until the USDA acts. And what I'm asking you to do is you have the capacity to adopt those state plans. Do it. And then people in Montana can start raising the stuff. We can start developing markets for pressing. We can develop markets for the roughage. We can wear clothes that will never wear out. And by the way, I've got a hemp hat I've been trying to wear out for 20 years that I got out of Canada. You can't wear the stuff out. And so I implore you, especially with all the trade stuff that's going on, please look at your options and look at from a perspective of not how can we not do it, but damn it, we got to do it.
I'm a do-it person, Senator.
You wouldn't be successful in business if you weren't.
With all due respect, if we had a farm bill by September the 30th, I think you'd had some rules here as well.
I get that, but you do have the option of accepting those state plans.
That is our policy currently, that we're accepting the plans under the 14 Farm Bill until we can fine-tune these regulations in the 18 Farm Bill.
So what you're saying...
This DEA is news to me.
So what you're saying is that farmers in Montana can plant hemp based on
the rules that the state was operating under the 14 Farm Bill.
I will get back to you on that because right now the farmers are telling me they can't get seed out of Canada. They could under the 14 bill.
If that's the case, we'll look at it as well and look forward to talking with your office about that.
Thank you. Have a great Easter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Good morning.
I want to bring up with you today the Senior Food Box Program. This is a program that's vital to lower-income seniors in the state of Maine, and Maine happens to be the oldest state in the nation by median age. It's also a state with a lot of low-income older Americans. Just to give you an idea of the reach of this program, there is a food bank called the Good Shepherd Food Bank in Auburn, Maine, which alone distributes approximately 9,000 supplemental food boxes each month to partner agencies across the state, which in turn distribute them to seniors. And that's just one, albeit the largest of our food banks. Unfortunately, this program, which really makes a difference to the nutritional well-being of our seniors, was eliminated in the administration's budget. What is the justification for eliminating the Senior Food Box program?
That's a good question. Obviously, Senator, while I'm a big fan of the food box, in fact, that was the beginning of the origin of our harvest box idea for SNAP, and I think it's worked very well. While the budget doesn't reflect that, I can't give you a justification for that. I think I'm a big fan of that. I know that a lot of seniors depend on that, and our food banks have done a great job in doing that. So,
thank you. I appreciate that answer, and I hope that's something where we can work together and secure the funding, which is not that significant, right, but boy, it's significant to a lot of our rural seniors. Mr. Secretary, I'm also concerned about the proposed elimination of funding for USDA programs that help farmers protect crops from pests and diseases. And I have to say, this strikes me as a penny-wise but pound-foolish cut. The proposed budget would zero out the funding for the Integrated Pest Management Program as well as the Minor Crops Pest Management Program, two initiatives that have been very helpful to Maine growers over the decades. Initiated in the 1970s as a potato-specific USDA pilot program, the University of Maine's Cooperative Extension's Integrated Pest Management Program is an integral part of my state's agricultural industry. What began as a small potato pest management pilot program has blossomed into a sophisticated multidisciplinary hub, helping Maine farmers control pests and diseases on a wide range of crops, including potatoes, apples, blueberries, cranberries, strawberries, and sweet corn. And this program has also helped to prevent harmful infestations that would decimate entire crops. And I want to give you an example. In the late 1990s, there was a new strain of late blight that was found in Maine that could not be easily controlled with fungicides as previous strains had been. And it was the Integrated Pest Management Program that isolated this harmful new strain, developed a specific remedy for it, and it saved potato growers from losing their crops and extraordinary revenue losses. In fact, without the work that was done by this program, the entire existence of the Maine potato industry would have been in serious jeopardy. So, Mr. Secretary, my point is that I think it makes a lot more sense to invest up front in these programs, these research and pest management programs that keep our crops healthy than to have to pay out enormous sums in disaster payments when farmers lose, or crop insurance, when farmers lose their entire crop. So again, I would ask for you to work with me and the committee to see if we can restore the funding for a program that I know personally, coming from the potato land in Aroostook County in northern Maine, has made a real difference.
I would welcome that, Senator. You've articulated extremely well the benefits of integrated pest management. Having a career in agribusiness, we've utilized that program all along. I would submit to you it's also been part of the growth of the organic industry as we learn to do things without crop protection chemicals in a different and new way. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you. It has indeed been a key boost to the organic farm that we have in Maine, and that's the fastest growing part of our agricultural sector in the state of Maine. So thank you very much.
Senator Udall. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and great to see you here, Mr. Secretary. Always a pleasure to have you up here on the Hill. Mr. Secretary, Senator Collins and I recently sent you a letter asking for your assistance for farmers who have been devastated by PFAS contamination. You're familiar with that, I think. In New Mexico, the source of this contamination is a U.S. Air Force base using firefighting foam. In Maine, I think it's a different source, but the impacts are the same. Tens of thousands of gallons of contaminated milk have been dumped. Workers and livestock exposed through drinking water, and farmers facing bankruptcy. One farmer has 4,000 cows that are contaminated by this, and he can do nothing with them. Nobody will take them. So I want to thank you because the USDA has been very helpful, but we need more help identifying programs and funding. In particular, I'm hoping you can work with us to ensure programs like the Dairy Indemnity Program and the Livestock Indemnity Program are used to their fullest extent for assistance here. Can we get your commitment on that?
We have, sir. As you noted, we have been working with the producer, the large producer in New Mexico as well, and trying to understand the standards, certainly from the meat perspective, getting standards there of what's acceptable and what's not in that way. But I think we as a government have responsibility, particularly if it's a iatrogenic type of issue such as we see in New Mexico. Maine may be different, but we got the same solutions that need to be addressed in Maine as well.
Yeah. And then turning to the EQIP program, which you're very familiar with, I've fought for years to make sure acequias and land grants are eligible for EQIP. The 2014 Farm Bill included important authority for this department to enter into alternative agreements with acequias. Acequias are these irrigation, old-time Spanish irrigation ditches in northern New Mexico that have been there for 400 years, and part of that is related to land grants. In the most recent 2018 Farm Bill, we built on this success and cut some of the red tape. Now land grants and acequias can apply directly to NRCS for federal dollars. This is a big deal. Hundreds of land grants and acequias can now directly access federal dollars for work on their communal lands and their infrastructure. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate new laws require new rules, but I do not want to lose the momentum while we await final EQIP rules. One idea is to allow acequias and land grants to enter into pilot project agreements. What will your department do to ensure continuity of funding to acequias and land grants while you finalize the EQIP rules?
Well, as you know, the EQIP program has been one of the more popular conservation programs. You all have generously funded it, although you generously funded it, it's always been oversubscribed as well. So this is going to create more demand. It may create more need for funds in the EQIP program, but we're working feverishly on all these conservation issues to implement the Farm Bill as you all wrote it. There are various issues of, and by the way, I need to mention, Mr. Chairman, you may want to look at the funding for the implementation of the Farm Bill. That seemed to be fairly slight this year compared with the new changes. You got new software, you got new training, you got different things like that we're trying to work to get it right, because the EQIP program, having been oversubscribed with this new influx of customers who certainly are well prepared to apply and do that. We look forward to the collaboration, but there will be some challenges going forward.
Good. And as you know, local input drives better decision-making, so we hope that the NRCS will hold local listening sessions in New Mexico while you develop the EQIP rules.
We certainly would welcome that.
And you mentioned broadband. One part of the whole broadband issue is in rural broadband providers, including tribally owned broadband providers. There's one in New Mexico called MATI and CAPS, and they would very much like to be a part of this program. So I hope that you can provide us an update on the refinancing of RUS loans, and will they be available to companies such as tribally owned entities in my state?
We certainly expect them to. If they need particular technical help in applying, then we would also offer that.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate working with Senator Collins on this piece of PFAS issue. It's a national issue. It's one that is growing because the contamination, I believe, is on about 123 Air Force bases flowing into communities, and it's one that we really need to get a hold of. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Perdue, Wisconsin's dairy industry is in crisis right now. Our farmers have faced low prices for far too long. They are seeing their export markets blocked and lost to competitors these days. Threats to close the southern border would actually dramatically deepen this crisis and this pain. In the past 2 years, Wisconsin has lost more than 1,300 dairy farms. That's roughly equivalent to 15% of our dairy farms. Farmers need stable markets. They need a way to sell their product at a fair price, and they should not be caught in the middle of trade wars with no end in sight. Mexico is by far our biggest dairy export market, and it buys about a third of the cheese that we export. I'd add to that that in Wisconsin, 90% of the milk goes into cheese. So access to the Mexican market is really, really important to Wisconsin farmers. And I'll tell you, even with passing comments about closing down ports of entry, has got Wisconsin farmers and cheesemakers extremely concerned. This comes on top of Mexico's retaliatory tariffs against cheese and the uncertainty of trade renegotiations. So, Secretary Perdue, Wisconsin's dairy farmers have been waiting patiently to see these trade issues resolved, but it has cost them dearly, and we're going to see more farms lost if this doesn't turn around and soon. So I want to hear from you what steps you are taking with your colleagues in the administration to resolve these trade issues and keep our borders open for trade.
Sure. Let's start with the good news. What you all did in the 2018 Farm Bill regarding the dairy is just transformational. There's no doubt that the dairy sector in your state and others probably were under more duress than any other sector there. We've heard some interest in getting the hemp rules out earlier. We focused on dairy because they're the people that have been in business that continue to go out of business, and we're trying to expedite the implementation of the Farm Bill in the dairy sector quickly. Just in a couple of weeks, they will start getting the refunds over the premiums they paid on the margin protection program. That will come along. The applications for the new program. In June, we expect to have the retroactive payments from the January 1st over the new Farm Bill provision. It will be a real benefit to your dairy farmers in Wisconsin, certainly those with herds less than 250, 300 cows. Regarding the trade issue, there's no doubt one of the problems we've gotten into in the milk prices over the country is that our producers have produced too much. We are overproduced. While farms have gone out of business, not many cow losses are there. We have many of the same number of cow losses. They've gotten bigger and more efficient in that regard. Certainly, we've advocated to the administration. I don't see any threat right now to close the border. We've advocated, I think, as well as others, how detrimental this would be to U.S. commerce as well. Regarding the USMCA, you make the case for an expeditious approval of USMCA, not just because of Mexico, but the additional access to the Canadian market that we get through that as well, which your producers, as you know, this Class 7 milk were harmed greatly in the Class 7, yes, which has been eliminated.
I'm going to cut you off there just because I have a couple of other questions, but I do want to just follow up on this one to say both Mexico and Canada have said that they will not finalize the USMCA until the U.S. removes the 232 steel and aluminum tariffs. What do you see as a path forward on that?
We're advocating to the President that he can accomplish his goals in revitalizing the steel industry and aluminum industry in the U.S. through a quota system as well, combined with a tariff when they exceed that quota. And hopefully he will come to see that that is an effective tool to continue to support our domestic steel industry as well. We've advocated for the removal of the 232 retaliatory tariffs ever since the agreement was signed. In practice, I'm hoping we can see those that reconciliation prior to the vote in all three nations.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I've run out of time. But, are you going to contemplate a second round of questions?
I am.
Excellent.
Which will start right now. Mr. Secretary, relative to funding for the Farm Bill implementation, that is something that we'll look at. I'm on both Ag and Ag Approps, and there should have been more under the Ag Bill for that. There was in the prior Farm Bill, so it is something we're going to have to address.
That's right. It's a significant reduction, so.
Yeah, and that's fine. We'll work on it here,
sure,
and we'll be talking to you about what you think you need.
Okay.
But yeah, it's something we have to do. Cell-based meat, can you update us on where you're at with the cell-based meat? We had Scott Gottlieb in before he left and kind of gave us his perspective. Please give us yours.
Really? Well, obviously, some people have thought the USDA is against any kind of alternative protein. While we support our cattle industry that supported us for many years and with great wholesome products, to feed a world of 10 billion people in the short term, we're looking at all opportunities. I think the MOU that's signed between USDA and FDA gets the right jurisdiction over them doing the laboratory work. Once that protein grows to the place of being harvested, that's when USDA comes in with the same kind of quality assessments it has on our live cattle, and the branding and the labeling and all of that. That's when USDA will become involved. So I think we have a good point of handoff between FDA and USDA on the cell-based meat.
Very important.
Thank you for your help.
Yeah, from our, as you know, from our cattle producer standpoint, very important that you're in charge of labeling, so the consumer knows when they're getting, ranch-raised beef and other product.
Our goal is for the consumer to be informed, understanding where that product came from, and they can make the choice. If they find no quality distinction, then the choice is up to them. But we don't want to treat a new innovative product any different or more favorably than our traditional products.
You'll appreciate the next question on my list was the Farm Bill included $15 million for implementation. How do you plan to allocate those resources, and will they be sufficient to meet the department's needs? But you've already answered that.
Yes.
And we knew the answer. But obviously have that same concern. Thank you for your comments on broadband. That was something I was going to bring up as well. Anything else you want to bring out on broadband? We obviously have made that a funding priority, and now the rollout is very important.
Well, if you all have particular constituents in your state that find it difficult to negotiate, we would welcome to help them. There's a lot of information on the web, and it's been communicated really since even during the shutdown. We work with different groups and interest groups to help them complete. We're looking forward to these applications that will come in and early appropriations for the dollar so they can get started. This absolutely is, I think, a transformational moonshot that I believe has the ability to connect rural and urban America in a way that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of excitement out there, too, about the program, so we're looking forward to it. Will the proposed FSA loan levels sufficiently meet producer demand? You know, we raised the FSA direct loans and also the guarantee. That was my amendment. I actually tried to raise it higher. I mean, the costs in production agriculture have gone up so much.
There's no doubt about it, and I think your recognition in the Farm Bill of those raising limits will help. We'll see. I can't answer directly. Obviously, based on the stress that we've talked about in the ag community, Senator Tester talked about, there's a lot of demand out there. There are people that are going to look to the FSA for their lending this year that may not have in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, the capital requirements are just so high now. I mean, a small farmer is still, deploying millions of dollars in capital.
And that's why you see the economy of scale getting larger and larger and farms growing larger and larger. But we'll have the census information out this afternoon. It'll be a great data point for you all to look at some of these issues as well.
The food aid programs are important. Obviously, they were cutting the budget, but this committee obviously is committed to them. Your thoughts on food aid?
Again, this is something the administration has, again, chosen to do. They want to make sure that it's done well. You all in Congress have had a different opinion, and I don't know that I can disagree with that regarding how that's utilized. I visited with Governor David Beasley the other day with the World Food Program and talking about how we can be more effective in USDA and working with them in that regard. Certainly, the administration in the number of budgets, that's where much of the reduction comes from in the USDA budget, and we acknowledge that.
Yeah, and to me, it's a win-win in that, we provide a certain amount of foreign aid, and to do it in a way where it also is helpful to our farmers, it just seems like a win-win in that respect. Thank you for the flexibility you provided on LIP in a very timely way, very helpful with what the cattle producers are going out there right now. Is there anything else that you want to make sure of record that I haven't brought up as far as issues?
No, again, I think really the disasters are real key. I mean, we've got situations we're not going to be able to cover with the safety net that's provided in the 18 Farm Bill. and I think you all know that. It's just a matter of the need is great, and for those people who are affected, it's devastating when you're in that period or place where things have been devastated. So hopefully we can get that resolved very quickly.
Well, we need to, and that's why your flexibility and responsiveness is really helpful in addressing what's going on out there right now with the flooding and other disasters. So we appreciate that. Senator Merkley.
Thank you. I'm going to mention several programs very rapidly. I'll have to follow up with your team.
All right.
Rural Energy Savings Program, which enables rural co-ops to do on-bills loans for energy saving for both businesses and households. Means a lot of rural construction jobs. It's just starting to get into rhythm. 14 co-ops across the country have adopted. Others are in the pipeline. It's rural construction jobs in places that don't have them, and that's important. African swine fever, a lot of concern about the imported meat possibly contaminating American hog production. A million swine have died in China. Just want to follow up on what we're doing to try to prevent that from contaminating our industry. Livestock forage disaster program, been very important for many of our ranchers following our forest fires out in Oregon. I know there's other different impacts across the country, tornadoes, hurricanes, and so forth, but I'd hate to see that program go away. In January 1st, 2020, the labeling law is going to go in for bioengineered food products, but it has a number of problems. A QRC code, which is a block computer code, is going to have a label, scan here for more food information. Nobody has any idea that it has to do with getting information on bioengineered. Plus, nobody in the supermarket is going to stop and scan those codes, and they're not even going to be informed why they would do so. The bioengineered sugar and oil is exempted from being considered bioengineered. I know my colleague from Michigan was assured that that would not happen, but that's exactly what we thought would happen from the language that was inserted. It's exactly what is happening. So it's really a misleading of Congress and the American people. We can do a lot better on giving fair information and a pathway to get the details. I realize not everything can be put on the package. Very concerned about the clean water supply and wastewater treatment. Small communities have to meet new standards, but it's really expensive to do for a small number of people. And so there is a calculation of the subsidy rate that has expanded in ways that are very surprising. I'd like to have my team sit down and understand better how the subsidy could have risen from 0.17% to almost 5% over 2 years, which means because of that calculation, far fewer grants and loans can be put out to these small communities. And I can tell you that is a big problem for them being able to have growth or industry in these rural communities. And then I wanted to turn to SNAP. And Oregon uses the waiver, and I've got a list here of the counties that are received the waiver. We have 36 counties, 22 of which got the waiver. This is over the 3 months and a 12-month period. They're all very rural counties. I mean, this is striking at the heart of rural Oregon, where you don't have the same jobs you have in an urban area. You have transportation difficulties that you don't have elsewhere. As we get more mechanized in the ag sector, a lot of the jobs are disappearing off our ranches and farms, so that's affecting them. We don't have rural housing construction, which we just talked about. We don't have, so I think the state should be left empowered to make this decision, but this proposed rule, you're striking my poorest, most rural counties with this rule. I think let the state make the decision. Leave the states empowered, and I just, on this piece, I do want to take my last minute and see if you have thoughts about it.
Certainly. We still give the states some authority to do that. They still can determine, let me just give you the guidance here. State agencies are responsible for assessing an individual's fitness to work on able-bodied issues methodically and comprehensively. The individual doesn't need to be receiving disability benefits. We believe, again, from the education and training, our goal is to help these people to sustain permanently, not indefinitely, on a food assistance program, which we think is more helpful. You can have volunteer, 20 hours a week volunteer, and others. If your local communities are higher unemployment there, there's still the waiver applies to them over that, as well as the state having 12% set aside for no reasons at all. So we think the flexibility that states are given used properly is in keeping with the Farm Bill from a perspective of 1996 over the work requirements.
Well, I'll tell you, the average lifetime in America is 12 months. So that's over a working lifetime of 480 months. That's a pretty small factor. And again, these are my most rural, my most difficult places to find jobs that are going to be affected by these changes. And we've often been a state that's among the hungriest in the nation. Not something we like, but this will make our situation in rural Oregon a lot worse.
We look forward to addressing all of these other issues that you've addressed, and we want to converse with your staff and answer your concerns over these issues as well.
Senator Moran.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Secretary, thank you. Let me go back to something the chairman said, talking about food aid, and I just would highlight, unfortunately, there are 4 famines ongoing around the world today. I want to particularly talk about McGovern-Dole, or as we say in Kansas, Dole-McGovern food program. Every year that this program has been zeroed out, which is every year in the last 3, the explanation is unaddressed oversight and performance monitoring challenges. Mr. Secretary, I say this with a smile, but if those really exist, fix the problems, don't zero out the account. And this is an important program to our country, its farmers, but most importantly, it helps lots of young people be fed around the globe, and I would encourage the department's support. In fact, I visited with you and with others about, I remember showing you a pile of grain in front of an elevator from 2 harvests ago that hasn't been marketed yet, and then we learn and know that there's people who die every day because they don't have food, and we ought to do a better job of connecting the two. In a more specific issue, I know that a month ago the effort began to hire a new director at the National Bioagri-Science Laboratory. This position, I hope you would share my view, is absolutely critical to the future of this project. And I'm curious as to where we stand on the recruiting effort. I hope that was more than just an announcement that you're hiring. I hope that you've been out encouraging individuals to apply, people with certain kind of characteristics, backgrounds, and intellect. Tell me where we are in that regard, please.
We're not as far along as I would like. Our recruitment efforts have not been as aggressive as I would like, and we've had discussions recently about that, about fulfilling that. It's a beautiful facility coming along well. We appreciate the transfer of the appropriations from DHS to here, but it can't run without the right people, and I know that I share your concern about that.
If you don't know at the moment, would you let me or my staff know how many positions beyond the director are posted and remain open?
We will do that.
Thank you very much. Then let me visit just a couple more issues. In the last Farm Bill, we were successful in including legislation called Farmers First. This deals with suicides among producers. This committee provided $2 million in fiscal year for the 2019 network. Can you speak to the importance of rural mental health services to fill in the gaps in what is currently available to those farmers and ranchers? I'm looking for an update on the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistant Network.
Well, certainly, as the anxiety, as the stress develops in the farm sector based on low prices, we see more and more of that. We also see opioid addictions as well, leading to opioid addictions or suicides or deaths by overdose. So this is an important effort, and rural development is heading this up. And it's always sad to hear things in places where you're unsuccessful, but we understand the need to have a network out there with call lines and helps, and hopefully we can continue to do that.
Please make this a priority, along with all the many other priorities that you have at the department. The 2018 Farm Bill directed USDA to do a feasibility study on dealer statutory trust within a year. Do you anticipate that USDA will be able to provide that study to Congress at that time?
I do. Certainly within a year. That gives us plenty of time to understand how the dealer trust applies to other types of similar situations we have with livestock and others to do that. I think we'll have that gives us plenty of time to have a good proposal for you going forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for the support that you have given the American agriculture through your leadership at the department in a very tough time. I've been so very impressed with you, and I greatly appreciate your efforts coming from a producer. You know, as we currently seeing the changes in the South and the Midwest of the severe flooding posing serious threats to the overall health and productivity of the agriculture industry. In recent years, Mississippi farmers, particularly those who farm the fertile lands within close proximity to the Mississippi River, have been subject to more frequent and severe flooding, such as my friends the Giddons, who farm close to the Mississippi River for 150 years. Some have even lost an entire crop 2, even 3 years in a row now.
When's she coming back?
This has made it difficult for them to find affordable crop insurance policy that provides them the level of protection that they need. A provision, Section 11122, included in the crop insurance title for the 2018 Farm Bill, directs the Department of Agriculture's Risk Management Agency to develop a cost-prohibitive policy for producers in areas such as this. The provision directs RMA to consider premium rate adjustments, automatic yield exclusions for consecutive year losses, and flexibility of final plant dates, and prevent plant regulations. Should this subcommittee provide the adequate funding in the fiscal year 2020 Agricultural Appropriations Bill, would you commit to ensuring that the Risk Management Agency works with these farmers impacted by flooding to ensure they have adequate and affordable crop insurance options?
Senator, this is an issue that I'd love to have further discussions with you on. The premise of the crop insurance is statutorily sound or statistically sound, and we don't need to violate that principle. Obviously, in where houses have flood insurance, we may want to look at it from a crop flood insurance provision to have something like national flood insurance that way. I would like to look at the provisions that you quoted in a better way to commit that what we can do from these growers that does not violate the statistically sound premise of crop insurance, where those people may go into areas where is more subject to flooding on an ongoing basis and just plant because of the backstop of crop insurance. We don't want to encourage that, but we may need to look at something like a national flood insurance premium, which may be what you're describing there, but I don't have the details from that today, but I'd love to discuss that with you further.
Thank you very much, because this is a serious concern, and these are very good farmers that, do it for the right reasons. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, Senator Baldwin is on her way back. She did have a few more questions for you. I know you have to be out here at 11:30, but we'll have you out then or prior. I understand the ag census is coming out. Crop insurance. I don't ever talk to our producers without them saying their number one risk management tool is crop insurance. And now more than ever, it's very important that there are no cuts to crop insurance because they need that protection right now. They need that help now more than ever. So just address that for me for a minute, will you?
Well, again, I hear the very same thing, that this has been the best type of partnership safety net between the federal government and the risk management strategies that farmers themselves use. So I think I couldn't agree more that crop insurance is vital for the safety net to continue, and we look forward to addressing that with you.
Very important, and as you work with RMA, that there are no cuts or reductions in what our farmers can do under that crop insurance, because, like I say, right now, it really is a critically important tool for them.
Acknowledged.
Given the challenges that we've been talking about. Also, I want to touch back on the dealer statutory trust. I'm glad that Senator Moran brought that up. A number of our auction barns have talked to me about that as well. And do you have any preliminary thoughts on that issue? And have you heard from the auction houses and the concerns they have?
We have heard from that, obviously, mostly from producers in that area as well, and from Senator Moran's office as well about this. And we're looking to create a trust product that could be utilized and funded by the commerce that goes on in that way. But it's a guard for unscrupulous or difficult financial situations that people find themselves in. But certainly when that becomes viral, many producers selling into an entity that is not able to pay them, of no fault of their own, then it becomes difficult. So I think a trust type of product is well needed, and we look forward to producing, recommending what we think will work.
Well, is there any pushback that you're aware of? I mean, all I've heard is that particularly auction houses have come in and said there are cases, where they're not getting paid. They're paying the seller, but then because there's a lien on the animals, they're not getting paid, and so they're just left holding the bag. Is there anyone? So that's what they wanted addressed, obviously.
I think
is there pushback against it?
The financial sector may have some concerns over the security issue there that we'll know more as we get into it.
So that's the reason for the one-year study, is to analyze the. How about your talk a little bit about progress on your business center and how that's going as far as the stand-up?
Well, we've been very pleased with the consolidation that occurs there. It gives a more consistent approach to problem solving within USDA, both in FBAC and other ways. It's a consolidation of those back office operations such as HR and IT and procurement and those types of things that make sense. We want to leave the decision making on the ground out in the field for those people that have to deal with that. But on the back office operations, that's what we're trying to consolidate and make it more consistent rules and with the business center concept.
And are you comfortable in terms of where you are with the budget and the funding you have, that you're getting that done and have the resources to do it?
I think so. We're gonna take what you all give us and do the very best we can. That's just what we do. But I think at this point I don't have any serious complaints about that.
As far as the disaster supplemental, are there aspects of that you are particularly concerned that get addressed or that are in the process that that you want to bring up as we try to get a package done? And also, to the extent we don't have it done, are there areas where you can help until that funding gets out there?
No, to answer your last question, sadly, no. We are deploying every emergency disaster provision that you've given us in the Farm Bill there, but some of this utter destruction is not contemplated. That's not a safety net. A safety net is a help that is normal in times. When you have utter destruction, as you had in the floods or in hurricanes, tornadoes, or wildfires, the Farm Bill doesn't contemplate that. We've got this situation in northern Florida, southern Georgia, really over timber and pine trees. We faced it in 17 with citrus. We'd never done that before, but we created the WHIP program with a block grant that I thought has gotten extreme compliments over the way it was administered. We're going to have to look at some things that have never been done before. Some of these trees, for instance, are not considered necessarily a crop, but they are just with a longer growing cycle. This was other people's livelihood. Mississippi and Arkansas, Alabama, the Carolinas, Georgia, pine trees were what was putting the kids through college. So I think, again, the discretion you all gave us in 17, we would love to repeat that with the 18 and 19 disasters, but really getting it done and getting it appropriated is a real issue. I don't have that many problems with what you put in it, but it needs to be done sooner rather than later.
All right. I turn to Senator Moran. Any other questions that you have? All right.
Nope. You want to?
Well, we're checking just to see if. Oh, here she is. Perfect timing.
Okay.
Your timing's just right, Senator. We just finished up. Senator Baldwin. You bet.
All right. Catch my breath here. Let's see. All right.
Are you saying that he leaves you breathless? Is that it?
I am saying that Dr. Francis Collins left me breathless in our other subcommittees. So, last year, we provided funding for dairy business innovation in this subcommittee and through the appropriations bill. And the Farm Bill really built on those efforts by including the text of the Bipartisan Dairy Business Innovation Act, which I introduced with Senator Collins. Can you please provide an update on the implementation of these provisions?
I'll have to get back with you on that, Senator. I'm not intimately familiar with that innovation. Obviously, the dairy sector needs as much innovation as it can. With their two stresses, obviously, milk prices, trade, as well as labor, and all those innovations that can help or are needed. But I can't. I will get back with you over those specific issues of what we've done or what we are doing with that those recommendations.
Well, certainly, when they can add value to the product on the farm or at the processing stage with new innovation. It is one of those tools that help our dairy farmers withstand these challenging times. So I hope we can get these funds out and working as soon as possible. On the same sense of urgency, the new dairy margin coverage program for the Farm Bill would be paying farmers right now because margins are so low. Farmers are making business decisions as we see spring come for this year's crops, and they're doing so without the information that they would usually have available to really get to understand the new dairy margin coverage program. When can farmers expect to have a decision tool to use to evaluate their choices for this program? And when can they expect to receive payments? I know you've commented on that already, but the decision tool sort of comes first.
Sure. We think the refund from the prior premiums will be out in a couple of weeks, April 23rd possibly. The decision tool should be forthcoming right after that. But I can tell you dairy farmers right now, they're really not going to need a tool. They're going to like it, and they want to sign up for it. They obviously need to know the levels, and we understand it's more difficult than that. But the decision-making tool hopefully will be in May, early May, in that way, so they can make those plans. And the sign-up, certainly they can sign up, but the payments that will be retroactive to January 1st, depending on what choice they made, should be done or in the probably second week or third week of June.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, thank you again for being here today. Thank you to Dr. Johansson and Ms. Navarro as well. We appreciate having you here. For members of the committee, if there are additional questions, we'd ask that they be in within a week and response within 4 weeks thereafter. And with that,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the partnership that we enjoy and look forward to answering your questions and other questions and doing what you have instructed us to do in the Farm Bill. Thank you.
Again, thank you. We are adjourned.
I felt bad that she was so effusive about you. I should have bragged a while longer.
Hey, I am so good.
Your question over the flood, the flood thing.
Yeah.
Look at the automatic.
Take care.
Secretary,
Carlisle, is that a call? You remember right?
Let me tell you about our.
I don't know if it's time to do. You were first on a few questions. Well said. One more move and a long line of moves.
We actually increased the spending a little bit, and also
Better Shelby.